People who knew murderers, when did you know something was off? My bio dad ended up murdering my stepmom. Everyone in my family, my mom and 2 older brothers definitely knew that something was up. He had severe anger issues and was very abusive. Some of the earlier memories I have are of him choking one of my brothers. He even almost choked my mom to death a couple of times. Obviously my mom was smart and divorced him as he didn't want to see him kill my brothers. Years later I come home from school and my mom and stepdad take us all to the side and tell us he shot our stepmom and was currently in jail. None of us were surprised. If anything, I was just so grateful my mom left him. It's so strange that I am directly related to a murderer. Next story. Never. He was a seemingly happy kid who brought a backpack full of, probably stolen, SNES games over to my place pretty regularly. The last time I posted this, I said he killed another teen in a drug-related turf war. I looked up his case afterwards and it was actually 2. Next story. A great-uncle shot one of my great-great-uncles for trying to fondle, or rape, another family member. Turns out everybody was tired of his crap, so the killing was never reported. Nobody quite knows where the body is buried, but my guess is that he threw it into the river. We were a dictatorship at the time, so seeing bodies flushed down the river was not uncommon. Next story. I never suspected a thing. She was the nicest woman. I even let her babysit my cousin when I had custody of him for a little while. She was my neighbor, couple houses down, and everyone loved her. She grew gigantic pumpkins, was always outside, so everyone interacted with her a lot. I moved away and a few years later and was shocked to hear everything from my family and friends who still loved in the area. The story, she was married to a man. I knew him from my time living there too. One day, he was just gone. She was all beaten up. She said he beat her up. We always suspected this happened before this incident, and had left her because he got a woman pregnant a few towns over. We never heard from him again, but didn't really have a reason to. She would mention every once in a while that he was still harassing her and was even beat up on another occasion after his disappearance. He was self-employed and didn't really have any family. No one suspected anything. 3 years later she was dating another man. While dating this man, the police had been investigating her for stealing money from the grocery store she worked at. They went to the boyfriend's cabin, where they both were, to arrest her. She came to the door, said okay, let me go put on some clothes. The police waited at the door. I obviously wasn't here for this part, so this is what I hear. The police then hear 2 gunshots. They run inside and she had poured gasoline and set the house on fire, then shot her dog then herself. It took some time to get the house fire under control. Once they did, and began investigating, they found another body in the basement that didn't die in the fire, but several days earlier. The body in the basement was her boyfriend. Then, they began investigating further, and found a blue 55-gallon drum in her backyard that contained her husband. So, she killed 2 people and her dog, and all she was suspected of was stealing from the grocery store. Edited to clarify that the body in the basement was the boyfriend and to correct the time frame between the husband's disappearance and her dating the boyfriend. I fact-checked with the news article. I was way off on the time frame originally. Next story. I worked at a box store about 20 years ago. A guy I worked with was always off, and would give away pocket knives to other employees. One day he came in with scratches all over his face. He had raped and murdered a disabled girl the day before, using a pocket knife he had given our coworker later that day. Next story. I moved to a new town when I was 19 and was making new friends at my new job. I met this girl at work and she invited me over to hang out with her and her best friend. I went and the best friend's boyfriend was there and the vibes were way off. I was uncomfortable. He was cold, and just seemed angry for no reason. They had mentioned to me before he got there that he was always controlling and had hit the girl before. Turns out controlling was an understatement. She came home one day and he was digging a hole in the backyard and she asked what he was doing and he replied, digging your grave. He hit her, said if he can't have her, nobody could have her, all of that. So eventually she left him and had to get a restraining order and everything. He somehow persuaded her to get in a car with him on her work break and they went missing for a few days. Turns out he stabbed her to death, threw her in a river and killed himself. I met the girl only a few times and him only the once, but the face that I was in such close proximity to someone capable of that gives me chills. She was so young, it was really sad. Next story. Honestly, this girl I went to school with killed 2 kids she babysat and their mother. Before that, I would have told you she was one of the calmest, coolest people in our school. Would have never suspected her to do something like that. Next story. The first time I met him. Jose was a friend of my ex and something immediately seemed off. He was sneaky, always lying and cheating, but not good at it cause he was dumb, and a total narcissist as well. I told my ex to keep his distance, that Jose would only get him into some crap. Not only did he set my ex up to be robbed, Jose snitched on a bunch of other people, and finally snapped on stranger in a fit of roid rage and stabbed him. The guy he killed was fairly young and a good kid, just in the wrong place at the time. I hope that butthole rots in prison. Next story. When he said there was a teenager, his mother and his stepfather lived around the corner from me. My mother knew them better than myself, but we all thought they were lovely. A couple of years ago the son went to the hospital several times asking for help. He claimed he had voices telling him to kill his stepfather, but each time he went he was released and told to come back. They would give an appointment. A few weeks later during a small argument he stabbed his stepfather to death in the front garden. He turned himself in the next day, and wasn't convicted as he sought help before it happened. Instead, he got the treatment he needed. Edit, I see a lot of people wondering if it might have been a defense/planned murder. It wasn't. The way he was killed, and how the son acted after removed any doubt. Next story. I didn't. He was the sweetest, kindest, gentle giant kind of guy. Kind of a weirdo, but still a great guy overall. I remember once that he shed a tear just by talking about his kid, because he was so filled with emotion from having him in his life. He turned out to kill his wife, kidnap his child, start the longest Amber Alert in the history of Canada. As he tried escaping to a different province, he killed another man to steal his car. I'm still unsure today if I should have seen anything at any point. It comes to haunt my nightmares from time to time. Next story. Kid I went to school with from 5th to 8th grade. He was always a jerk. Typical class clown but with a mean streak. When we hit middle school, he was always making comments about / to girls that were incredibly inappropriate. I never liked him and hated being around him. He ended up getting into meth and shot his mom and dad in their sleep while high. His mom died and his dad survived but was severely injured. Last I heard, he was crying crocodile tears saying he regrets everything and wants another chance. But knowing him, it's total crap. He deserves to rot. Edit, should probably add he shot his parents when he was in his later years of high school. I only went to school with him from 5th to 8th because I changed schools. Next story. I've worked with 3 murderers in my job role supporting people with disabilities. All 3 had varying degrees of learning disabilities, and honestly, only for one of them did I know something was up. He worked out a plea deal as his disability meant that he appeared to lack mens rea and fitness to plead. It was as I was taking him home after all of the investigation was over, he turned to me and said, "Don't tell my wife about this." It was at that exact moment I knew he knew what he'd done. The other 2 incidents, one was so traumatized by what she'd done, that she never recovered. She'd been in prison for 25 years and was broken when she came out. The last was a couple, another vulnerable adult had gone missing. They even helped with the search teams. They were in bits, really concerned for the welfare of their friend, went on TV for an appeal for her to come home. She was under their bed the whole time. Edits, tried to clarify the wording a bit. I wrote it a bit too hastily and caused some confusion below. Interesting that no one has asked about the second one. She was a literal axe murderer. She came home one day and found that her father had murdered her mother. She grabbed a nearby woodcutting axe and beheaded him. She got out early due to the mitigating circumstances and time served. She developed terrible schizophrenia after that, hence my involvement upon her release. She ended up going into a secure mental health unit as she couldn't cope on the outside. She was badly institutionalized.